Hi Victoria, thank you for joining me for our Women Who Make It Happen series.
Thanks so much for having me.
You're welcome. Could you give a brief introduction to you and a little bit about your career to date?
Sure. I'm the founder of Cherrybank Consulting. I'm a non-exec director on a medtech company, and I'm also a charity trustee. So those are my current hats that I wear. In terms of my career, I started off at the financial regulator, which became the Bank of England, and I did 7.5 years there. And while I was there, I did a range of roles in authorisation, banking supervision, insurance risk, and 2 secondments, one to Whitehall as a policy advisor and another to the House of Commons as a committee specialist on the Treasury Select Committee. And once I'd done all of that, I felt I'd got the most out of the public sector that I could do, so I moved over to the private side. And I was a group risk manager of an insurance firm, a COO of an asset manager. And then alongside those roles, I did a Master's in Public Administration and also a Diploma in Investment Operations. So that was my kind of academic qualifications.
How on earth did you have the time to do all of that?
Yeah, I think being good at time management but also realising you can do everything, just maybe not all at once. Mm-hmm. So, it's been over the course of my career. I think sometimes I just really wanted to do things. So I wanted to study alongside working. And so I just made the time. I think that's the answer.
Yeah. It's interesting, like your background, having worked in the Bank of England and then an insurance company, an asset manager. How have you navigated the change, or what are the differences that you see mostly from the bigger institutions into that startup to scale-up phase?
Yeah, I think I managed it because I did it quite gradually over a few different steps. Probably the biggest move was that move from the public sector to the private sector, which a lot of people make typically via maybe a consultancy, but I went straight into the industry. But I think I was able to do it because I was doing an operational role. Mm-hmm. So, if you're doing risk management, whether you're doing a really large or a really small organisation, you're fundamentally doing the same job, and it's the same. It doesn't really affect the way that the business makes money if it's an insurance company or an asset manager. Kind of risk management, operations, compliance, corporate governance, all of those things stay quite consistent, whether the company's large or small. So I think that's why I'm a real advocate for careers in operations, because they are so transferable and so variable that you really can find loads of different places to work that you'll find enjoyable.
So what was the biggest difference you felt from public sector going into private?
Well, I remember my first day at the private sector. At the Bank of England, we'd had some really expensive chairs, like thousands of pounds each, and then you get to the private sector and it's like there's an arm missing, the back doesn't work, and you realise that actually the private sector manages its money a lot more tightly, perhaps, than the public sector does. So that was one thing I noticed. I think there's also, the private sector is always going to be a few steps ahead of the public sector because, the regulator is always playing a little bit of a game of catch-up. At the regulator, there's quite a few people who, spend a lot of their careers, if not all of their careers there, whereas I think in the private sector, there's a bit more rotation. So I think that was an interesting difference between the two. Yeah.
How about changes from gender bias or any significant changes that you felt from the evolution from public sector to private, and maybe what you've experienced in your career?
I think for me, they've been quite balanced. The Bank of England did do, initiatives like Women in the Bank, but actually in the private sector organisations that I've worked on, the insurance company that I went to, the CEO was female. So I think that set the tone quite nicely there. Yeah. So I think, the private sector is also doing pretty well.
Yeah, very good. So throughout your career, you've held risk roles. What motivated you to get into risk management initially?
So I think it happened quite organically because my background had been, from the regulator. Yeah. So I really just worked on my expertise that I had because I'd been a supervisor for banks initially.
Yeah.
And then when I moved into the insurance division, I moved into the risk department because I worked on a report about the impact of climate change on the insurance industry. So I became...
Very interesting.
Yeah, it was. And the reason I got that is because the secondment I did at Whitehall was to the Department of Energy and Climate Change.
Yep.
And I'd engineered that because I'd originally done a degree in geography. So I took my geography knowledge, my knowledge of finance, went to Whitehall and became essentially their finance expert.
Yep.
And I worked on the Energy Efficiency Directive, which was really interesting. It was kind of imposing EU legislation into the UK, and I ended up going to EU member states conferences and the International Energy Agency to be a UK representative, which I was like 25, so it was quite a lot of it was a great experience and a lot of responsibility at quite a young age. So once I'd had that under my belt, when I came back to the Bank of England and I heard that they were doing a report about the impact of climate change on the insurance industry, I actually tracked down the COO and I said I would be the perfect person to work on this project.
Oh, really?
Because of my experience. Yeah, I literally backed them into a meeting room and just said, you need to move me to this project. And they agreed, which was great. They were all ears. And so I ran that project, and that involved talking to 30 of the largest life and general insurance firms, asking them how they thought about climate change, and then bringing all of those opinions together to form the report, which Mark Carney, former governor, was a real champion of. I helped to write a tiny bit of one of his speeches. It ended up on the front page of the FT, so that was all really worthwhile.
You've got a claim to fame as well.
Yeah, just a little tiny. And then once I'd done that report, I heard that, again, the Bank of England always sends a secondee to the Treasury Select Committee. Yeah. So I just saw it and thought I'd be a really good candidate, because what they needed was an insurance specialist to write a report about the impact of Solvency II, which is an insurance regulation on the insurance industry. And again, I applied and I was like, I'm probably the best person to do this because I've just done a report for the insurance industry. I have all of these contacts. I can write 90,000 word reports, so that's proven. And fortunately, I got that secondment, and that was brilliant. It was just such a unique experience working at the House of Commons, learning how politics works, how policy's made, how select committees work, APPGs, how people vote. I really just got stuck in. I worked on a number of different inquiries. So the main one was Solvency II, but I also worked on kind of access to banking, and the restoration and renewal of Parliament was another one. All of these things, I should say, are, they're team efforts. There's, someone's holding the pen, but there's always, lots of people involved around to shape the report. It ultimately belongs to the committee. But while I was there, I took an opportunity to go to Beijing. Again, I just saw a little email go around saying we want to send people to the embassies around the world to let them know how select committees work. Yeah. And so I just put my name in the ring and I said, I'm going to Beijing anyway because I'm doing a summer school there. And so it worked out nicely. I did 2 weeks at Peking University doing a summer school in Chinese politics and public policy. And then I did 2 weeks at the embassy teaching the staff there about select committees. So I think I always just look for opportunities and then throw myself at them.
Yeah. And what's really interesting is, because we come on to this, it's you taking the initiative and you putting yourself forward. Yeah. Not everybody, clearly, in that stage of their career has maybe that self-confidence and self-belief and maybe the proactivity around it as well. So we'll come on to your words of wisdom, Victoria, but what do you believe your key success factors have been then? Maybe it ties into that. To get you to where you are today.
I think, being hardworking is an obvious thing, but I think it's just being consistently hardworking. And to do that, you've got to look after yourself as well. So look after, make sure that your health is fine so that you can kind of put those hours in. Make sure you take your holidays. When you're off, kind of just to keep going.
I need to take a leaf out of that book. I don't. Yeah.
You just have to. You've got to like unplug and power down and then power back up again. I learned that particularly when I ran my own company. I was doing 6 days a week and it was just unsustainable. sustainable. So, so hard work. I think just always being curious. I just love learning, and I love, going, well, how does that work? How do they take the votes in Parliament? So I went and volunteered to do it, and I've always been like that. I think when I was at the FSA, they asked for community affairs champions. So I thought, oh yeah, I can do that. That sounds fun. And then I heard through that about the London Olympics wanting volunteers for the opening ceremony.
Yep.
And so again, I just
put your hat in the ring for that as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I did that. So we did. I think someone worked out it was like over 100 hours of rehearsals, all of which was for free. It was voluntary time. And I got to be part of the opening ceremony and the closing ceremony as well. So it was just a huge life experience, and all of that came from I just volunteered to be a community affairs champion, and it spiraled from there. So I think just feed little seeds everywhere and just see what grows, I think, is one of the tips. And just be curious, kind of ask questions, and put yourself out there, because you never know where it's going to lead to.
No, that's it, exactly. And you've had some very unique experiences, and the opportunity in China and being in the House of Commons, and obviously with the Olympics, the opening ceremony. I mean, it's not every day that you are afforded those opportunities. No. So, and that the overarching consensus really is just put yourself forward for that. Interestingly, have there been any circumstances where you've not put yourself forward, and maybe it's been reflecting back, it's been a somewhat regret, or you'd have done things differently?
If I have, I think you tend to, I must have applied for jobs and not got them, but you don't tend to dwell on those things, because I'm a great believer in fate, and what's meant for you will come to you. Yeah. So as long as you stick to your your own kind of beliefs, and for me that's kind of working hard and being curious, then the right things will come along. I think even with my very first role at the FSA, I think I got that role because I'd been working since I was 15, and so I graduated in 2009. It wasn't a great year for the job market. Yeah,
not so great.
No, but when I applied, and I applied to finance because money makes the world go round, but it also brings it to a halt, and so it seemed like an obvious place to to learn and start my career. I applied, with my CV having on there like retail experience when I was 15, hospitality experience when I was at university, and experience in finance in my summer holidays. Mm-hmm. So I think I was, they could see okay, this person knows how to, get out of bed and go to work. And I'd had experience in different sectors as well. So I think they thought she's probably quite malleable. And, wherever we drop her, hopefully it'll work. And I think it did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I'm certainly a big believer in there's always more we can do to help that younger talent coming through, whether it's the education at school level or university level and STEM subjects. And it's almost like you don't know what you don't know. Yeah. Sometimes though, I know when I've spoken with other ladies as well, you've obviously taken that proactive approach. Has there been anybody kind of featured throughout your career that's been a mentor figure or a coach as well that has helped to shape your career?
Yeah, I think along the way, I've had some, really good managers, really supportive managers. Yeah. I think, when I was at the insurance company, the COO made me realise, I want your job. Your job's really cool. I love that you get to do a little bit of everything. Yeah. And then, when I've been when I was at the Bank of England, when I was working on the both those reports, I got exposure to the senior advisors at the Bank of England, and they have a wealth of experience, and they were really good at problem solving, because with these reports you're having to integrate loads of different opinions in one place and ultimately come to a consensus. And that was actually really interesting, because I've done the Myers-Briggs test.
Yes.
And when I did it at the Bank of England, I was ENTP, which comes out of being the debater. And that makes perfect sense to me, because I was having to listen to all of these different opinions and written submissions. When I was at Parliament, we've got 50 written submissions, which is a lot. Mm-hmm. Read through all of those. never disregard things, but weigh things up. What is the consensus, and then come to a conclusion. And that was essentially my role, while I was in the public sector. But then we did it in 6 degrees, the Myers-Briggs again. It's also called 16 personalities. And it came back that I was the commander, and I was like ENTJ. And so I feel like my job had slightly changed my personality, being, away from needing to reach consensus to actually needing to get stuff done. And, being given the visionaries, who are the co-founders, the entrepreneurs, giving you a direction and giving you a goal, and then you get on and execute it, and being quite sure of yourself. And I think that has just happened gradually and organically with the different roles that I've done.
That's really interesting, because that gives you an idea of not only the wider personality profile, but it links in a lot to what we actually cover of leadership styles, management styles, and how that impacts your interactions with your peers or your employees. So what would you say your leadership style is?
So I think it's really that what I just said now, the setting a goal and setting a direction is absolutely crucial for leadership. And you think, if you're leading in battle, you're leading a ship, if you're leading a team of people, it's all the same. You need to really set out what is the destination that we're driving to. And you see that entrepreneurs do that. They're on the internet, all of these entrepreneurs, you can find essentially their mission statements of like, here's where we're at and this is where we need to get to. So I think you have to start, like, that's an absolute fundamental. But then beyond that, I think it's willing to listen to different opinions is really important. So having to slightly adjust your course. So you can't just be very myopic. You have to be necessarily kind of open-minded, willing to learn, willing to listen, and adjust accordingly. You have to be, that's being collaborative ultimately. And then beneath that, I think it's being creative in terms of the solutions that you come up with. You need to be innovating constantly in order to keep ahead, because the frontier is always moving forward, so you've got to kind of keep up and move forward with it. And then it comes down to the operational side of things, which is people, systems and processes. That's what ultimately operations boils down to. So with people, it's hiring good people, but then giving them the space to grow in their role and empowering them to get on with it. So hire people that you trust, don't micromanage them, give them that destination, and then trust that they'll take it off in the right direction. And really cheerlead them. And we'll come on to that. Big believer in really bringing along the next kind of generation, or indeed people who've moved into the world at later stages in their careers as well. In terms of systems, it's all about technology now. And of course, AI is the buzzword, but before AI, it was data science. Before that was statistics. And actually, the insurance industry was so far ahead. So I find it interesting now that I'm in advice. The advice sector at the moment is really fascinated by AI and is implementing it. But the insurance world has been implementing, AI, data science, statistics for its entire length of being, because it always needed to know, well, what is the likelihood of this ship sinking, or what's the likelihood of a fire happening or a car crash. So I was in the actuaries department at the Bank of England, and I was just surrounded by the people around me were all actuaries, and so I really was seeped in their knowledge of just how important the data was. Like, the numbers kind of don't lie. So the insurance industry was just way ahead, and I feel like other sectors are catching up with them in a way. So that's technology. And then processes is really just marrying the two together. So how do you get the people to use the systems well, to getting those two aligned, and that comes down to having good kind of policies, procedures, etc. But I think maybe wrapping all of that together is kind of the authorship is leadership in a way. So you ultimately need to write what it is, if it's writing that mission statement, or if it's writing, the documentation that you need people to follow, or if it's writing, we do a newsletter, or when you write a blog post, you're writing those things to kind of bring people in and really lead them on your particular journey. So that's something that I always keep in mind.
Yeah. Really, really interesting points you've made there. And I think where you've mentioned continuing to innovate, I find that particularly very, very interesting, because obviously innovation is quite nuanced and subjective and very personal to each institution that you work in. What do you think the industry as a whole needs to do differently?
Yeah, I think it's really, like, the advice industry as a whole is very collaborative and very, there are endless amounts of conferences that you can go to, which I do attend and I really enjoy. I think the key trends that we notice are that there aren't enough female advisors, so there's a gap there. In fact, there aren't enough advisors for the UK population in general. So I think that's one of the gaps that needs to be addressed, is bringing people into the market, and hopefully more women and underrepresented people, because as a population, we should be reflecting the population that we serve. That's, 101 of a business, is that you should try and reflect what your consumer base looks like. So I think that's where, I'm on the operations forum of the Chartered Institute of Securities and Investments, and one of the things we're working on is a podcast series to talk about operations, but to bring people in. Let's say they have already been a GP, or they've been in the military, so they've already had a career and now they're looking for a career change. Moving into the advice sector could be a really good option for them.
Really good, yeah.
Yeah, and so, educating people on, these are the exams that you need to do. This is, how you might go about setting up a company, what the options are that are out there, because you're not just going to fix it with school leavers, because there's a need for an older generation now. And you also shouldn't abandon people just because they're slightly more senior and older in their career. We need people at every stage, and to bring them in. So I think that's what the industry is thinking about at the moment.
Okay, really interesting. For those, I think that the school leavers or the graduates then, and we always usually say this, or even reflecting back throughout your career, Victoria, what advice, those words of wisdom, would you personally give to younger females or younger talent generally? What would that be?
I'd say get into finance. I think for a lot of people maybe doesn't seem that cool, or it does seem quite closed off.
Buzzword, doesn't it?
Yeah, at the moment, people. I think the younger generation. I think a lot of them, to be honest, want to work for themselves. I think there's a huge trend, like a huge hustle culture, and I can understand that, because I did set up my own company, Cherrybank Consulting, and it's still running, kind of 6 years later, so I get it. But to give you a good understanding of, really the economy and how the world works, finance is a really good starting point. And you can go into finance, there's various grad schemes, you can do qualifications. So if someone's up for it, doing, accounting qualifications, or, CFA, IMC, those are, some of the routes in, because finance is really present in every industry. It's in fashion, it's in film. I have a really good friend who's an accountant for a film production company, and they can have all of the ideas that they like, but really it comes down to the films that will get greenlit are the ones that have the budget, and what does that look like? So finance is present in all creative industries as well. I think sometimes people just think finance isn't creative and it's not fun. And it absolutely can be, those opportunities that are there. So I think, number one is get into finance, do some qualifications. I think they're not the be all and end all, but if you're at the early stage of your career, they're a really good way of just turbocharging quite quickly, and getting up to speed. There's various options are available to plug into.
And I mean, they'll be able to see you and your career success from this. Thank you for joining us today.
No problem. Thanks.